Hey guys, it's Dave. Welcome back to the channel and thanks for tuning in. Today I thought a fun way to look back at 2023 and all the different events and things we've had happen in the space industry would be to grade on a A to F level different space companies and how they performed in the year. So I'm not going to be basing this solely on the stock price of a company or valuation if it is privately traded, but I will kind of take that into account. But this should be much more about how the underlying company has executed during the year as opposed to the, variations in the stock price. So obviously, this is just my opinion. I'm likely to be extremely biased. I know I'm biased towards Rocket Lab. I'm going to try to hold that in check and keep things logical, but ultimately this is my opinion, and I would love to hear your opinion down below on which of these companies you think I put in the wrong category, what you'd move up, what you'd move down, what companies I did not cover, because obviously I can't really get to all of them in this video. I just kind of cherry-picked a few that I thought would be interesting. By the way, I do hope you had a Merry Christmas or a Happy Hanukkah or a Happy Festivus or whatever else you do celebrate. And if you do enjoy this kind of space investing content, I hope you will consider hitting that subscribe button by the end of the video. So with that out of the way, let's get started here. I'm going to start with an old school space company that I think we're all pretty familiar with, and that is Boeing. So thinking about Boeing during the year, obviously they did have a successful launch. And by the way, they're not necessarily C, I was just kind of moving it around. They did have a successful launch of the SLS rocket after several delays dealing with that hydrogen leaking and stuff like that. But on the other hand, if you will recall, Starliner has been a bit of a disaster, continues to be a bit of a disaster. They had that issue with the flammable tape throughout the vehicle, and they're going to have to make all sorts of modifications going even further back. They had some issues with valves getting stuck and things like that. So, a lot of delays with SLS, but they did ultimately launch. A ton of delays with Starliner, which continues to be a massive money loser for the company and was supposed to be in service years ago now, still being delayed to next year. I think personally, Boeing deserves a D grade. Let me know what you guys think and if you think that's pretty fair. Not giving them a failing grade. Obviously, they're not going out of business, although their space side of things seems like it's been losing money lately. But I think a D is pretty fair. And by the way, guys, if I do want to distinguish some of these, I might throw a plus and minus in there, like an A plus or a B plus or like a C minus type thing. So that's where I put Boeing. Let me know how you feel about that down in the comments. Next up, we do have VSAT. So remembering back, I know VSAT doesn't make a ton of headlines, but they did have a massive failure this year where they commissioned a Falcon Heavy launch, which is, not something most of these constellation operators ever need because it's such a large satellite going to a distant orbit. This was probably the biggest insurance claim we've ever seen when it comes to commercial satellite companies. The satellite did get to its intended orbit, but did not operate successfully, and $900 million write-off from what I understand. So that's likely to shift the entire paradigm of insuring satellites, how much insurance does cost, because these insurance companies can't afford to continue writing checks like that, and really just a tough blow for the company, although they are still operating profitably. Hard to give them an F rating if a company is operating profitably, but yeah, that failure was really tough. Do I want to give them a D, a C minus, a C? And by the way, I didn't plan out before filming this what I'm going to rank each of these companies. Yeah, just that that satellite not operating, I think that's a big blow. Obviously, I'm not a complete expert on VSAT, but I'm going to go ahead and I'll give them a D plus. How's that? D plus, so that would put them actually slightly ahead of Boeing here. Boeing D, VSAT D plus. Both still passing grades, but definitely not good. Next up, we have Firefly Aerospace, another one that isn't publicly traded, but a very interesting company looking to make progress on their Alpha launcher. So on the one hand, they did have their first fully successful launch of their Alpha rocket, which is about a 1-ton launch vehicle to low Earth orbit. They had a successful launch, which, congratulations, is always a massive milestone when a rocket has its first success. But they followed that up with a failure where the second stage did not relight and did not get the satellite to its intended orbit. So Alpha is not looking like it has a great track record so far. I believe they've had like 4 launches, maybe, partial successes. Well, so if a satellite doesn't make it to the correct orbit, can you consider that a partial success, or is anything that's not success a failure? I would have to say if it doesn't reach its intended orbit and re-enters too soon, that's got to be a failure, right? So rough recent launch for Firefly, but on the other hand, they did have their first success. They do have some other deals in place. They're not only working on their rocket, they're working on like a lunar lander. They have some contracts and cooperative deals with Northrop Grumman. They're working on a new medium launch vehicle. I think I'm going to give them a C on the back of that successful rocket launch, but they do lose points, obviously, for the failure and other issues they've had with their Alpha rocket. Next up is an interesting one. I don't know if you've all heard about this because I did not mention it on the channel. The company is called Avio, which is one you might not be too familiar with, but they're a European company operating the Vega rocket. Now, Vega rocket is going out of service, but they were supposed to have one last launch. And just a completely wild story, and that's the reason I'm including this, because I think it's hilarious and a lot of other people do. They lost a tank for their last Vega rocket. It just got lost. They couldn't find it. Then they realized someone scrapped it and sent it to the junkyard and it got damaged. Like, how do you do that? How do you throw out the last tank for your rocket that is supposed to be launching? I don't know. Just like, I think a kind of story I've never seen before and I thought was absolutely hilarious. So for that reason, I have to give them an F. I'm sorry, Avio. They may be doing a lot of other good things. Obviously, the European launch space is looking a little tough with Arion space and Arion 6 not online yet. Obviously, Vega going offline. They don't really have any operational rockets right now, and they threw out one of the tanks for their final rocket, so they can't really seem to launch it. You get an F, my friend. That's a failing grade. I am sorry. Next up, another company you should all be familiar with. We have Astra. And I don't think there should be a lot of doubt as to where this one goes. I mean, it's got to be either D or F, right? They haven't gone out of business, although they have had a completely disastrous year. They obviously canceled their original Rocket 3.3 system, tried to move on to Rocket 4. The stock price has absolutely collapsed. They've gone down to a valuation of something like $35 million from, multi-billions of dollars of valuation. Most people seem to expect them to go out of business. The CEO and chief kind of technical guy have kind of put in an offer to take the company private, so that could be potentially a path to survival. But I have to go ahead and give them an F, just due to, the failures in Rocket 3.3, the lack of funding they have. They're running out of cash. They're trying to scrounge up more money any way they can to stay alive, but really looking extremely bleak for the likes of Astra. I feel bad for anyone who is invested in them or did invest in them, because you have most certainly lost pretty much all your investment. Got to give them an F. Very rough year for Astra. Next up, we have another space company that you should all very much know about. It is Blue Origin. So an interesting year for Blue. They fired their CEO. They seem to be, pretty slowly making progress on New Glenn. It did obviously not launch in 2023, but towards the end of the year, we did start seeing some signs of life. We saw some potential flight hardware being moved around. They're hoping that the new CEO will be able to help them move faster. But in the win column, they did pick up a large contract with NASA for their lunar lander, a new version of the lunar lander that was, according to most people, much more impressive than the original design. So that's obviously a big deal for the company. And their new Shepard did have a failure, though, which caused them to not be able to launch their space tourism vehicle for really the majority of the year, which was something that I really didn't expect. And it took them a really long time to bring back into service. So I would say you lose points for New Glenn going slowly. You lose points for the new Shepard failure and long time to get flying again. They get some points for landing that deal for their lunar lander. And then, of course, they announced a few other things like their Blue Ring spacecraft for like orbital servicing and maneuvering and stuff like that. I'm going to go ahead and give them a C. Would you put them higher than Firefly? Firefly did get a successful orbital launch, but they also had some failures. I'll give them a tie with Firefly. I'll give them a C. And, things are starting to look a little bit more optimistic for 2024. Jeff Bezos did an interesting interview that you might want to check out on the Lex Friedman podcast on YouTube. And there's some signs they might be able to right the ship in terms of the new CEO, New Glenn, getting closer to launch. At least Jeff says he's very confident they'll launch next year. A lot of other industry watchers less confident. So, next one I wanted to talk about is one you probably all know and love if you watch this channel, and that would have to be Rocket Lab. So, trying to leave my bias at the door here. I know that's probably impossible, but just being aware of it and thinking about the year logically and honestly. So, on the one hand, we just got this massive contract announcement, which did land in 2023 and does fall within that year. This is a massive deal for Space Systems, a massive deal for the entire company, as I talked about in a previous video, doubling their backlog, a quarter of the value of the company in revenue over the life of this contract. It's with the government, a very good customer to have. A lot of good things about this big deal. On the other hand, at the start of the year, they did say that Electron would launch 15 times. We've ended up with 10 launches. So obviously there was an anomaly, which I don't really blame them for. It was a very freak incident, but I still have to take it into account. It still did happen. They had a failure. They only launched 10 times, not 15 on the year. Now, they, I do think, have set themselves up for a great 2024. They're going to try and launch maybe 23, 22 times, which is an absolutely amazing growth off of 10 launches. And 10 launches is still a record for the company, still good enough for number 2 in terms of American space companies. But yes, the failure did happen. It is disappointing, and we were looking for more launches. So I'm thinking, to be fair about the company, and by the way, we also didn't get the hot fire of their Archimedes engine this year, something we were kind of looking for as one of the major neutron milestones, although we did get some other neutron milestones like that second stage tank test, and we know they are making good progress. I'm going to go ahead and say that's good for a B+. Just trying to be fair here, obviously, I'd love to give them an A+ every year, but then there's no room for improvement. And just trying to be honest, I think B+ is pretty fair, but let me know what you think as well down in the comments. Next up we have Planet Labs. So it's another one which most people consider to be sort of the number 2 space back, the second best space back to invest in. A lot of people who are investors in Rocket Lab also have shown considerable interest in Planet. However, I do have to be honest here. I don't think they had a great year in terms of the growth of the company and the financial side of things. They've had to reduce their revenue guidance like 3 or 4 times throughout the year, guiding lower and lower as these contracts they keep talking about being in their pipeline, not signed yet, or still not getting signed. And the revenue growth has really slowed to a crawl. They have most definitely missed what they guided for in their SPAC investor presentation. On the other hand, they're still saying they will become profitable next year, and they're doing this by, instead of, being fueled by the revenue growth, they're, cutting back and making some severe cuts to employees as well as spending. So I know that's rough for the people involved, but the company has decided their priority is to maintain hitting profitability at that date, which could be the right call for the company. But I can't discount just how bad it has been in terms of those revenue growth numbers dropping like a stone. So I'm going to go ahead and give them a C-, I think. Some questionable decisions maybe from management as well. Don't think the management is really as strong as Rocket Lab, but if they do return to growth in the future, they could still very much have a bright future. Next up, we have Arion Space. So they are obviously working on the Arion 6 rocket, which has been much delayed, is going to be an expendable rocket, kind of Europe's launcher for the future. It's been a long road for the Arion 6. It's looking like it's going to be extremely expensive. It's not really going to meet its targets for what they initially set for launch costs. And it's been a rough go for them, but in the last month of the year, they did have a successful test of the Arion 6, a hot fire, the engines in the vehicle, and it looked pretty good. So that's kind of the saving grace for them. Still looking very rough, but I'm going to give them a C-, kind of putting them in line with a Boeing, both, slower old school space companies that have been having some problems, but made some progress. Perhaps Boeing did have that successful launch and Arion with that successful test. Now, another company we should all be very familiar with here on this channel is Virgin Orbit. Obviously, they were going to be probably the biggest operational competitor to Rocket Lab's Electron, launching their rocket launcher 1 from that modified Boeing 747. Ultimately, they had a failure on their launch from Cornwall in the UK, but the financials were looking very grim even before that. They weren't really making money on their launches. They needed a lot more launches to right the ship, and I'm a little skeptical. Even if that launch was a success, they would have needed very badly to raise money. And ultimately, they went out of business. So obviously, the shareholders lost pretty much all their money. They were bought up for parts, bought by Rocket Lab and a few others. Rocket Lab, that's another point in their favor, got a great deal on a lot of these Virgin Orbit machines and facilities. But Virgin Orbit itself, clearly an F. They went out of business. No way around that. Rough year for Virgin Orbit and their shareholders. And, the economy changed. Money used to be flowing freely towards all these kind of aspirational up-and-coming companies. Interest rates rose. Investors got a lot more skeptical and a lot more holding their cash close to the chest, and Virgin Orbit was ultimately unable to raise additional capital and failed. So next one up we have on the list is another company you probably are familiar with, United Launch Alliance. So thinking about the year, ULA did have, I think they only had maybe 2 or 3 launches. I know they launched Amazon's prototype Kuiper satellites after those were delayed several times and shifted around from ABL's rocket to the Vulcan rocket, which was delayed to one of the legacy ULA rockets. Finally got those off, so, they did have a couple successful launches. Vulcan was supposed to launch this year, and it did not, so that's a big mark against them. They are looking like they're getting very close to launching Vulcan in 2024, but yeah, that explosion in that upper stage, obviously very rough, caused a lot of delays. They've also been kind of advertising themselves, looking to get bought. And I don't think that's a very good look for a company either, saying like, oh, we want someone to buy us out, basically looking like they might get bought by Blue Origin or 1 or 2 other companies out there, but I think Blue is probably the front runner at this point. So I will give them as well, I think, the Vulcan delays, really difficult. Obviously, they did launch successfully, but yeah, all trying to sell yourself and all this stuff. I think a C ranking for ULA is fair. Let me know what you think. Always open to hear your thoughts. Could they be a B? No, I wouldn't push them to a B-. I think I'll keep them as a C. Okay, now we have the big dogs, and it's crazy how fast this has changed, because not long ago they were really the small dogs, and they are SpaceX. So they obviously delivered the vast majority of payload into orbit this year. They did launch astronauts to the International Space Station. They're really America's only ride to the ISS. They've done so many things so well. I mean, it's hard to... You can't argue with the record of Falcon. Yes, they had this one booster fall over in rough seas and was lost. That's too bad, but, it flew like 19 times. They got a lot of value out of it. It's not the end of the world. It's definitely a good record. And also, you've got to think about the future, their work on Starship, their work on Starlink. Starlink turned a profit this year, which is amazing, a massive milestone for the company and very much good news for the future. Their valuation also skyrocketed. Their new capital raise, I believe, is valuing the company at $180 billion, which is obviously good news for any investors and, one of the most valuable private companies in existence. The only negative point against them, which I do have to bring up, is their first test of Starship rocket, or they thought they were going to be fine without like a water system to protect the ground equipment, was not fine. And they basically blew their launch pad to hell and launched dust and concrete, way up into the air, damaging things in the area. And, that was a setback. That was unforced error is what I would call it. They, could have had something in place beforehand, flame diverter, water suppression system, all the rest. Obviously, they did turn things around, get that fixed in remarkable speed, as they're just an extremely fast company. It's always impressive, but that was an unforced error. So I'm going to switch them down from an A to an A- just because of the damage to the landing pad, really. But they continue to make fast progress on Starship and are getting ready for the next test flight, something that is sure to be an exciting event. So to all you Rocket Lab fans out there, I'm sorry I did give them a higher grade than Rocket Lab, but I think that's justified. And let's remember here, Rocket Lab, market cap $2.5 billion maybe. SpaceX market cap $180 billion. So our final company for today is none other than Relativity Space, a company that has been kind of making some headlines lately. Kind of seems like they're starting up a little bit of a back and forth. I won't call it a feud, but a little bit of disagreements with Rocket Lab in terms of philosophy and how things should be done. So, on the positive side of things, their first launch of the Terran-1 vehicle was mostly successful. Obviously, didn't get all the way to the intended orbit, but it looked good, right? They made it very far. Their engines looked good. For a first ever launch for a company, they did quite well. They did better than the first launch for ABL, the first launch for a Falcon 1, the first launch for, most companies. Also, they are making good progress on their Aion-R engine for their next-gen Terran-R vehicle. But on the downside, they did cancel that first rocket, which I guess it probably makes sense fiscally, putting all their energies towards a larger vehicle. It's always very sad to me to see all this work done on a vehicle and then it never ends up launching real payloads. And those beautiful blue flames when it launches, we got some breathtaking pictures. Really sad that I'll never see that one launch again. So much work put into it. But they feel like this really proves their capability. It will allow them to raise more money towards the Terran-R, and Terran-R will ultimately be the vehicle that makes them profitable, so they want to focus on that. Could be the right business decision, but just from a rocket fan point of view, it's sad for me, for sure. So now this means this rocket company will not be launching again until 2026. I think I'm going to go ahead and give Relativity... this is a tough one. This is a tough one as well. I'll say C+. We'll put them kind of up with Firefly. Firefly had a success, but they also had more failures. Relativity, in terms of propulsion, they look like they really know what they're doing with their engines, but it's a long road to their next launch. So the cancellation makes me sad, and I'm going to give them a C+. Let me know if you think that's too generous or not generous enough. Always open to hear your comments. Oh, and by the way, they did announce that redesign of the Terran-R, phasing back 3D printing for a lot of those large components. I didn't really like that walking back on what they've been saying, because the promotion of the company has always been for ages that the 3D printing is going to make it way cheaper and way faster. You'll be able to 3D print these rockets on Mars one day and all that. And then they kind of walked that back. Yeah, it just kind of feels a little awkward to me. So C+ for Relativity. Oh, and one last company I almost missed here. It is the one we all know and... well, we don't all love. Some do. It's Virgin Galactic. So, interesting year for Virgin. I will give them credit because they did launch more space planes than Blue Origin launched their tourism vehicle, something most of us did not expect to happen. And they have managed to, hit that cadence that has been pretty impressive, like one a month for their vehicle. However, on the downside, one a month is not enough for that vehicle to be profitable, and they are announcing that they're phasing it out and eventually canceling it, and they did kind of cancel some flights that were previously planned. They also announced a ton of layoffs to try and conserve capital, something that, to be honest, probably should have been done, 2 years ago, I think, because they've been burning just so much money, and the only way for them to hit profitability is if that next-gen Delta vehicle really does the numbers that they are saying and thinking it can. Richard Branson also announced he will not be giving Virgin Galactic any more money, putting any more money into the company. He says they should have enough to make it on their own, and the company's on their own now. Virgin Group does not have the deep pockets they used to have. So that kind of safety net of Mr. Branson, Sir Branson, is gone. And one other positive in their favor, though, is that they did successfully raise more capital. One thing that the company has been very good at. The stock price as well, though, has dropped all the way down to the mid-2s, so it's not done well for investors. So all these factors are leading me to put it as well. I think it's a C. A C because on the plus side, they were able to do all those launches, but all the financial factors and my concern about their cash burn and being able to make it to profitability is why I land them at a C grade. I'm definitely open to your opinions, though. I know there's a lot of Virgin Galactic bulls out there. So those are the companies I've decided to rank for today. Obviously, there's a ton of other companies out there we didn't get to, the likes of Intuitive Machines, ASTS Space Mobile. Tons of others. Let me know which company I didn't rank and what you would give them. Definitely a variety of opinions out there. This is just what I landed on. I hope you found this interesting. Just kind of a nice look back at 2023 as we head into 2024. Good years for Rocket Lab and SpaceX. Pretty decent years for Relativity and Firefly. Rough for Planet, kind of rough for ULA and Blue Origin, although there is signs of life on Blue's front. And then, of course, the old school space companies, VSAT, Boeing, and Arion Space having rough years. And in the F category, we do have Astra, Virgin, and Avio for that absolutely hilarious loss of the tank. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you have a great day and a great rest of the week. If you haven't subscribed, please do hit that button down below and you'll be making my day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.